second day. I think it's the second day of summer. Today's forum is something that's, been bubbling around in my mind for a little while. Just to, back up a little bit, I'm Craig Willingham. I'm the Deputy Director here at the CUNY Urban Food Policy Institute. We're a research and action institute that really looks at a range of different issues related to food, from issues around labor, food procurement, healthy eating, and this kind of intersection between food and technology, particularly when we look at the labor force that's involved, has really been an interest of mine for some time. And I think, for those of you who may have read the commentary that I put together, I mentioned that food workers in this sort of whole dynamic is kind of like the canary in the coal mine when it comes to many of the changes that we're likely to see in a number of different sectors, if not entirely across the board. And I think that it's important to think about what are the next things that we need to do in order to ensure that our society continues to be productive and equitable and is moving forward in a thoughtful way. But also, it's a very exciting time. There's not any of us that doesn't use technology in some meaningful way. I mean, I knew that the technology thing was going to stick when my mother was using Facebook and my mother was using MySpace, and my mother got a cell phone, which are things that 10, 15 years ago I never would have thought. Now it's just a sort of ubiquitous happening. So anyway, with that said, I'd like to welcome all of our panelists and our moderator, Jeff Potter, who's going to do some very brief introductions, and then we'll get into the discussion. Thank you.
So I'm excited to be here tonight for a number of reasons. One, food's really important to me. Everybody eats, right? And it's a great way to understand kind of history, society, science, politics. There's so much that it touches on. Secondly, most of my professional career has actually been in technology, like credit companies, which has left me kind of partly disillusioned and partly delusional. And finally, I love talking to people about kind of the food side of things, the technology side of things. My own background, I did about 2 dozen interviews for a book I wrote some number of years ago, and actually found the interviews to be the most kind of engaging and interesting parts of what I learned. So I'm grateful to have a group of experts here tonight to answer as many questions as I can figure out how to ask in the time that we have tonight. I'm going to keep the intros brief. I'm going to ask 2 questions for everybody here, limited to 1 sentence, really short answers, and then we'll go into about 15 minutes of some specific questions that are more in-depth in the topic, and then we'll open it up to questions from folks. So I'm going to start with Jose, whose title is the Director of Data and Research at the New York Communities for Change. Okay, Jose Gonzalez, what's your field? Use the microphone so remote people can hear.
It's economic and policy research.
And then, how would you describe that in 1 sentence? Like, what's the nut of what that means?
Well, for NYCC, it's very much how it affects our numbers. So, just understanding how. Sorry.
There we go.
That's not 1 sentence. Sorry. I don't have any answers. I think it's what I said before.
Don't have any answers. So it's really about data and questions.
Yeah.
Okay, Julia Ticconi, your title, postdoctoral scholar, Data and Society Research Institute. What's your field?
I'm a sociologist.
Okay, and if you had to describe that, what would you wish everyone would understand about what you do?
I would have to say, even as an academic, I'm very verbose, so this is tough. But I would say data are people.
Data are people. It's a great T-shirt slogan.
I'll be selling them after the event.
With technology as it is, we could probably order T-shirts here in the next hour. Sebastian van der Ziel, title, Director, Global Thematic Analyst, Cornerstone Capital Group. What's your field?
So Constant Capital is a sustainable investment manager.
And then what do you wish everyone would understand about what you do?
That integrating environmental and social governance factors into the investment process actually makes it a better process. Defining better as you want to define it.
That can be a very long conversation when you get to better. Stacy Weiser-Miller.
Hello?
Is that on? Are we good there with the
Yeah,
audio?
we're on.
So title, Senior Project Manager, Smart and Sustainable Cities, New York City Economic Development Corporation. What's your field?
So I work within the Center for Urban Innovation as the Senior Project Manager. Our field is economic development, and my one tagline is that we really try to create good jobs in strengthened neighborhoods.
Strengthen neighborhoods. And what do you wish everyone would understand about that?
So
One sentence.
One sentence would be that we build programs to close ecosystem gaps and help strengthen emerging sectors or strong sectors within New York City.
And then our last panelist, Michelle Murrow, title, Founding Executive Director, this is a long one, I'll warn you, New York City Food and Beverage Hospitality Council and Food Services and Accommodation Industry Partnership of the New York City Department of Small Business Services. What's your field?
Food service and hospitality expert, and our just one sentence. We support businesses and to sustain growth from a workforce perspective and also from a business perspective at the same time.
So now before diving into the questions, I want to take a moment and ask folks who are at least here in the room, what do you want to learn about tonight? And again, trying to keep it short, shout out 3 or 4 word tiny tag phrases. Like what are the things, now that you have a slight sense of some of the people in the panel, that you're curious about? What brought you here tonight? Current trends. Job satisfaction. Okay. So current trends, job satisfactions. What else do we have?
How to support workers without having to support the evil technology companies that exploit them.
That's long, but good. Supporting workers over tech.
How can technology help us aid workers better without increasing the cost so much that it creates a circle that's never.
The worker pay without increasing cost. Do we have any others that you want to throw out? Please.
How to invest in positive health outcomes.
Investing in positive health outcomes. These are really broad. We could probably do 4 different panels on this. So I kind of want to start by jumping into what the near future might look like. Specifically thinking about technology and the disruptions in the food ecosystem. So we'll get to the impact on workers in a bit. But first I kind of want to ask this crystal ball questions of where do you think we're headed? So where is tech leading us? And maybe I'll start with Sebastian, since you spend a lot of time looking at investment opportunities for individuals and foundations. Let's start with you. Where have you seen technology impacting the food sector the most, both good and bad? And what do you think the next major disruptive change is going to be?
That's a tough question. We had looked very deeply in the retail and the food sector in the end of 2015 when this debate, the 515 debate as well as the tech debate was really coming around. And what we had seen there, having speaking to a lot of consultants in the fast food industry as well as a lot of different companies, the question for us was how to drive labor productivity. That fast food workers had not grown with the rest of the economy in terms of their productivity. And look, there are a lot of factors of that, and that's not a sort of judgment. That is exactly what's happened in the industry. The question to us was what technologies would come about, and we immediately saw that kiosks would be the model of which most people adopted. And we've seen that now. McDonald's, Panera obviously really came out early and did that with mobile ordering and kiosks. When we asked everybody, we said to them, would you automate cooking? Almost every one of them said no. There is something tactile, there is something emotional about cooking that we were not sure. We saw a lot of technology. There is a lot of technology. You can go and see pizzas being made by tech. So what's interesting, and this is probably an aside and not very helpful for this debate at all, that everything has now flipped to the retail worker. The fast food worker automation debate has really slowed. So, but from fast food, where we would go forward on it, would be saying that clearly a lot of fast foods are saying we're going to be delivering, and that's going to have implications for, because there's a lot of contractors in that business rather than paid workers, and that will be much more of an Uber model, I imagine, with those kind of structures. So I think the disruption of technology within the store itself, within the envelope, we don't see a lot more in the very near term, although, look, making those judgments is tough. But I think the entire logistics chain, the way in which food is delivered, is possibly going to undertake a lot of a change.
Anybody else have additional? So there's this interesting thing kind of going towards meal kits, which are, outside of the envelope of the retail space. There's actually a really good Atlantic article that came out today called The Paradox of Restaurants that actually steps through kind of a lot of the different data points. And one of the things I found really fascinating there was that last year was apparently the year where, in terms of the dollars spent in the American economy, the amount that we spent away from home was larger for the first time than was spent cooking food at home. So we're now seeing more money being spent out than at home. There's this interesting in-between thing for me here, where we're looking at eating out versus cooking at home, and there's kind of the meal kit delivery stuff, or delivery of food coming to the home, eating out at home. There's apps like DoorDash that Craig wrote about a little bit, and that whole gig economy thing of hooking up kind of a freelance worker between the restaurant and your home. And then we get into things that are like Blue Apron, which are closer to cooking at home, but it's not like you're going to the grocery store and picking out your meal. So, in terms of looking at where those things might go, and actually, Michelle, this might be kind of given your background, since your work is really in the area of helping food and beverage industry here in New York, including the workforce training, where do you think that the meal kit services and all of that space in between, where if the envelope really is set kind of in the store, the disruption there is mostly done, but it's everything up to the groceries that I'm used to cooking at home, where do you see that headed? And then how does that change the food workforce?
Well, honestly, I see it's definitely disrupting the grocery and the restaurant industry. But I feel, just from my point of view, this is a short positive impact for the food meal kit. We have seen it, generating over $1.6 billion in revenues, but haven't really seen a strong growth in the last year. Most of members who signed with DoorDash or Purple Carrots or Blue Apron have dropped.
They have a really high churn rate.
Yes.
Yeah, it went 18% this quarter.
Absolutely. And there's many reasons. Yes, definitely. It supports a lot, especially individual who works all day, women who are mostly in the workforce, and they have no time to go in and cook the meal, which normally costs around the $15, $52 approximately a week for 3 meals or over. But this is not going to change the consumer behavior totally. So I compare it to the frozen yogurt era. Sorry, I have to say it. Now you have the poke era. Now it's a frozen yogurt era where everyone was opening frozen yogurt all over, and there was a lot of interest and excitement for a number of years. And now we see it's all evaporating and disappearing. And it's a huge market. It's huge competition. So when it comes to the workforce, how this is affecting the workforce? Is it affecting in a positive or negative way? Honestly, I don't see a negative impact on it yet. It's a process to prepare a meal, even though it's broken down into small pieces. So there's a lot of growth on the workforce side. But how long this is going to sustain? Is it going to sustain for the next 10 years? I don't really see it being a long-term.
How
How much of that do you think is because of the specific implementation of things like Blue Apron, or do you think it's something more fundamental to the nature of those sorts of meal kit, or the space between the groceries and the delivery, that whatever the in between is?
I really don't have the answer to this, but mostly if you really compare between the grocery or if you're going to the grocery and you're getting the whole breakdown of the meal, or you're getting soup, Blue Apron, all plated. It's very hard, seriously, to really see where this is heading and how this is going to really impact for long term. As I mentioned earlier, from a consumer behavior, this is really, in the beginning, you see a lot of, yes.
Okay.
Sorry. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
We got to remember to kiss the
All right.
microphone, as they say in Hollywood.
Very close. Okay.
So you're saying that consumer behavior is responsible for the churn. How much of it is the cost? I mean, is there a point where Plated or Blue Apron or any of these kind of meal kit services where they get scaled up to a point where you see it as being cheap enough that people will start to do it because it's
There's a lot of competition now. It's a huge competition, especially with so many. There's over 150 different meal deliveries. Martha Stewart is going into it. Amazon, we're partnering with Amazon. You have Tyson Foods are getting into it. So you're going to see a lot of competitive pricing, which is going to really help the consumer. But again, it's going to come a point where you have to scale down on your quality to be able to keep the $15 or margin that you're charging the consumer. And again, it's just a matter of time where we see it just scaling down versus.
my head is running thinking about the Amazon and Whole Foods acquisition, because that to me just,
Yeah.
I see Julia's kind of doing this with her pen, like she's got something to say here. So
I just wanted to go back to something, Sebastian, actually you said before in your answer. This phrase of outside the envelope, thinking about the envelope as the store, really jumped out at me. Maybe it's because I'm, I look at, in my research, I look at the ways that people use words and try and interpret, the ways that those categories shape the decisions that they make and things like that. And it struck me that this idea of outside the envelope being the store where the workers are, or inside the envelope being the store where the workers are, and outside the envelope being everything else, right? All of the different parts of the food logistics system, which is vast and interconnected. It really brought up something that I've been finding really interesting lately, which is the ways that those systems are actually really densely interconnected, right? So I recently just did this interview with this woman, and as you said earlier, it was Craig actually who said it earlier, the fast fashion is kind of going where fast food, right, has been, that this woman worked at Zara, which is one of the most notorious sort of fast fashion companies, as many of you might already know. And she was telling me about the ways that her boss told her that her schedule was based on the weather, and also based on events that were going on in her city, whether there were going to be parades, whether there was going to be foot traffic, whether it was 4th of July, where the trucks were scheduled to be on the road at a particular time in Utah or in Wyoming to get the clothes actually to the store for her to unload, right? And so this idea of things being outside the envelope or inside the envelope, especially as we look at data-intensive technologies, which is my sort of area, that line gets increasingly blurry, I think. And when we think about the experiences of workers in the stores or workers in the warehouses also, which is something we should talk about, that it's important almost to see those linkages. I just kind of wanted to get that out there.
I'm really curious what's going to happen with the Amazon and Whole Foods stuff. I just think I don't think we've seen the end of this one yet. And I'm surprised at the 150 companies that are trying this. With a background in tech companies that have been VC funded, I've come to the realization that sometimes the optimal consumer use of these sorts of services are while the VCs are still subsidizing them. Because it's, if it's $15 per meal, but it's actually costing them $20 per meal, then, but I wonder at what point that's going to flip over.
But you have also, even grocery stores are going into packaged meals and delivery too as well. So
I remember being in the Austin Whole Foods, that's their corporate headquarters, and they do a lot of kind of tests of what they're thinking of. This is maybe 5 or 6 years ago. restaurants inside the grocery store. They were piloting this there in Austin about 7 years ago, and it's like, oh, this makes so much sense. So it's, yeah, it's just, I don't think we've seen the end of this one. Yeah.
So I think these models actually lend to a lot of great local procurement options that I think, New York City could really benefit from. I don't think that we see enough of that with some of these companies currently, but I do think like New York City itself lends like a really great food and beverage kind of culture here, where we as a city and food workers and food manufacturing could actually like very much so benefit from something like that. So I think that that's something that also the consumer really has to be very loud and very boisterous about what they want. If people are, gaining more margin or less margin, depending on what the consumer is looking for and where the supply chain is going, it's really the consumer coming back to these companies and saying, actually, I want my pickles from Brooklyn, right? Instead of, oh, this is just food in a box. And I think that's a really key thing for New York City, and where, everyone in this room could really have a voice in some of those things, or even just specifically with those companies and how they get their food.
This is making me think about the skew on a tomato, where a tomato is not a tomato, but from an industrial large-scale system point of view, we skew them all the same. But really, there's actually very different properties and characteristics to that Brooklyn pickle. It'll be interesting again. I want to turn now a little bit towards technology as a tool, both its good sides and its bad sides. I know one of the comments that was thrown out earlier was looking at how to support workers kind of over technology, and kind of the balance between what the tech companies might do for their own gain versus the experience that workers have working for them. But before going too far down onto some of the challenges there, just starting at the technology side, it's obviously got both its good sides and its bad sides. So let's start with the good side. What are the advantages at this point that food workers now have because of technology? What is it allowing us to do? And maybe it is that Brooklyn pickle, if we can get there, which I haven't seen us being that integrated. What is it that we're seeing that is working at this point? And I'll leave this kind of open to everybody.
I think the model that definitely from the investment community uses Panera, and the question of a integrated, technologically enabled store that has driven out, given Panera the ability to pay people more because the technology they're using is complementary, and that they are able to hire more people because they're preparing more stuff. I think that's a pretty clear model now. If you can do, as that process is, obviously that's been adopted by a few, and their decisions, whether it be McDonald's or others, might reflect their own cultural values. For instance, Wendy's is using technology as a threat, basically. They're saying to the world, if you raise minimum wage, we will automate people. I actually think that's a terrible, terrible threat to make, both from an investment perspective and also from a pure societal perspective. But if we do look at technology in a publicly listed company, Panera probably leads out on that basis in being able to show us a model of technology in the fast food world that's meeting a lot of people's needs.
Interesting to hear the Wendy's versus Panera side, and you made a comment there about the societal benefit versus kind of the company benefit, and there's a balance there.
Well, they're interconnected. I mean, I think these fast food companies, the ones that are good, know that you operate within a continuum and you operate within an ecosystem of people's views, and people feel that worker treatment is something that's important. It comes up in every single consumer survey. When you have workers that are seen to be treated worse, you see same-store sales growth issues, you see issues with retention of workers, you see issues with the quality of the service and all those things. So, when we talk about environmental, social, and governance factors that materially impact the investment case, social, the way you treat your workers is fundamental for fast food. And hopefully, with the focus on 15, with this push, with this automation push, you get companies who may not even be the publicly listed companies right now, but you get the companies of the future that think about this in a more creative way, that actually have some ability to think about this differently. And obviously there was discussions of all the linkages and thinking about those in a more concert way. Otherwise, watching Wendy's put kiosks, under these threats, it's a poor response, right, to the way technology should kind of
So how would I, as an, shall we say, an average consumer, how would I know when I go to a store, hey, this place treats their workers well? Right, how do we know these things?
I was going to say something about this. So the question was how technology actually helps workers, right?
Yeah.
So I think, like every other aspect of life that's been affected by technology, the position that workers hold also has been affected, and so they're able to leverage the same technology to get work better positions and find more jobs and stuff like that. I think the problem, though, is that many times the advantage is on the side of the employer. So Kathy O'Neill, I don't know if folks know who she is. Math babe. She's, I think she's a math teacher at Columbia University. Anyway, she makes the metaphor of a gun. Or, it's so the people who actually have the technology have their finger on the trigger. So the technology is always good for them. But
Kind of Indiana Jones, where he has the gun and the other person has the saber coming at him.
no, I think people don't.
I'm saying in terms of
average person-
in terms of the employer has the upper hand over the employee.
Right.
And it's a strange metaphor, especially this time of this day and age. But essentially, that there is. So how do we know that when we're going into a company? How do we know the ones that are treating their workers well? How do we see that as consumers?
That's a good question. I mean, as consumers, I think we have to be vigilant to find out. But I think that as the labor market gets tighter, a lot of these companies are going to have to do something about that. They're going to have to treat people better and pay them better and stuff like that.
Do you think it'll actually diverge a lot? Either companies will treat them better, a la Panera, or treat them worse, like Wendy's?
I think Wendy's won't work.
Michelle here is like jumping into.
No. I'm not. I have to answer for this. I think it's. Not I think. I have over 60 different CEOs and owners of businesses. Versus it varies from one owner of one restaurant to 150 restaurants. And to answer your question, how you see it is if you walk into McDonald's and you walk into. I'm not doing a marketing campaign here, but just to give you a comparison. If you go to McDonald's or you go to Le Pain, Condotien, or Le Maison, Kaiser, you could see the difference in not the attitude, but how this worker is comfortable around his environment, the type of service he's providing, the quality of service, which plays a big role. If you're getting paid right and you work in a good environment, you're going to produce more. Most individual leaves companies not because of companies, they leave it because of managers or working environment that's really affecting. So really the working environment is you could see it in any place you walk in. If you walk into Starbucks, how many times you walk into Starbucks and you received a bad service? Hardly any.
Yeah, almost never.
Hardly any, because they're being treated very, very well. Versus if you go to McDonald's, and not to bring McDonald's into the ground, but just the reality is they are switching into more automated systems, especially in New York City. If you go some of their stores, they're slashing 50% of their workforce. They're switching it with computerized systems where you go in and you just order and you have two people, standing there and they just give you your order. But again, this is just one thing. The second, your question was how is technology affecting the workforce in a positive way? I would say yes. We have seen a tremendous amount of companies are investing in technology and asking for more grants and more help from the government to really revamp their technology system to really help grow their workforce, not only from number but also from the pay level. There's many technologies that's already in place now that can help your labor costs, your food costs, because the more you can bring your food costs down from 60%, what most I would say small fast food operator runs, you are able to really reinvest some of this money in your workforce. So
I want to go back to the coffee thing for a moment. I have not been to McDonald's recently, so I don't know the cost of a have my personal
15
consumer.
cents. I was,
15 cents.
15
So
cents. That's
if we want to look at worker pay without increasing costs, which is one of the topics that was thrown out from an audience member, Starbucks is almost a premium, maybe even luxury product in the sense that you're paying for something and getting something better, but there's also, and so that would be the premium part, but the luxury part being that there's also some amount of that payment that's, this is a hard thing to describe on the spot like this. Hopefully you can tease out kind of what I mean by the difference between those two. There's something about the Starbucks bit in terms of the way we pay for it and the cost of it that if they were to try to be cost competitive, not taking into account the luxury, the premium difference, just the luxury difference. I guess there is this: how do you actually make that sustainable across the board for all for the workers in the McDonald's cases? Like if McDonald's raised their prices to correctly compensate by the Starbucks definition,
they will never be able to do it. It's a consumer. It goes to the perception. If you go to McDonald's, you're looking for
cheap,
and more a value meal versus you
for
luxury.
Something that makes you feel a certain way.
Sure.
So then, how do we reconcile that? Especially when there is a push for a $15 minimum wage. What happens? Is this the bifurcation where you get McDonald's becoming more automated because they can't afford?
This is a reality. They will be automated, even though their profit margin is higher than most, I would say, fast food, fast casual establishment, but they are already leaning toward that.
Got it.
Sorry,
Yeah,
can I add? So first of all, there are a few people who are already talking about existing ways that these workers are working alongside machines, right? So if anybody has been a worker at a fast food restaurant in the past 10 years, anybody? It's a very automated environment already, right? So a lot of these workers are already doing a lot of the things that they're going to be, that those trends are going to be intensified. It's not going to be a wholesale change, right? And I think that's a lot of the themes that we've been talking about here. The benefit side, which as a critical sort of sociologist is actually hard for me to think about, so I appreciate the impetus to do that. One of the things in a Panera model, we should get paid, by the way, for referencing Panera so positively and so
we'll
often.
have to bleep out every brand reference.
Right?
In the
Yeah,
recording
exactly.
efforts, right?
That'd be very confusing. Is there might be an opportunity? I don't do speculation very much, but there might be an opportunity for if these workers are working alongside machines in positive ways, for those workers to gain skills in terms of their ability to troubleshoot these machines, to do some kind of basic engineering with the machines, which I know as a former fast food worker, you do anyways, right? When you try and troubleshoot, oh, the oven isn't working, you have to kind of figure out, pull the plug out, plug it back in, oh, the screen doesn't work if you do this or that, right? You can imagine a more advanced version of that kind of on-the-job troubleshooting actually being a marketable skill. That workers, if that troubleshooting gets advanced and is actually trained for, that might actually be a skill that allows workers to move into different professions or to move up, right? So that's the positive side. The second thing I wanted to add is a technology that we're not talking about. We're talking a lot about food prep tech, is scheduling technologies. So not for a long time, but for the past several years, a lot of these companies have been using mobile phone technologies and technologies within the store that managers are able to manipulate to push workers' schedules to them and to communicate with workers more efficiently in some cases and less efficiently in other cases, to be flexible around worker schedules when it's done right, and when it's done poorly, provide very unpredictable schedules for workers, right, to kind of change them willy-nilly. We had that famous New York Times article about the Starbucks barista. Starbucks said they were going to change everything. That is yet to be seen, whether that's actually happened or not. But the scheduling technologies...
What was the Starbucks barista story?
Oh, okay. So this is a famous... I mean, it's famous in my world, maybe not for anybody else. There was a profile of a Starbucks barista in the New York Times in 2013 or 14. It was several years ago. And they talked about her very unpredictable schedule. So she was often required to close up and open. So she was kind of left with 3 or 4 hours of sleep at night. And it was because of these automated scheduling systems and oversights between when she was available and what actually made sense. So she would say, oh, I'm available from, these particular hours a day. And because she said she was available, the system kind of populated her schedule with
with shifts, even though it doesn't make sense for somebody to close a restaurant and also open, unless that's something that you want, which this worker did not. And so after this, there was a big uproar, as New York Times articles often produce. And the CEO of Starbucks said that he was going to look into this and that they were going to make sure that their schedules were more predictable. I think they said that they wanted to give workers at least a 1-week window, ideally a 2-week window, where they actually knew their schedules in advance. This, for me, is the most pressing issue for food workers in terms of technology right now. It's not as sexy as food prep, but it is an issue that's affecting them.
In my head, I can already imagine the case of somebody who has 2 part-time jobs and the scheduling incompatibility.
Incredibly common.
Well, it's not. I will say it's not an issue anymore because of the new law that was just passed in New York City. I'll say 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, just roughly.
What's the new law? At
Where you
least
have
for New York City, we're okay.
Well, yeah, we're good in New York City, but you have to give the workers 3 weeks in advance if you want to change their schedule. It is only specifically targeting fast food industry.
So then, how does a worker who has 2 part-time jobs
will be able to plan 3 weeks in advance?
Got it.
Yeah, so it's pretty protect the worker from keeping his job and be able to get another job and sustain quality of living.
So one to do out of this panel today is take this New York City law and make it apply nationally. Is that
for fast food.
For fast food.
For fast food.
And retail.
And retail.
So I just want to pick up on the education within the store kind of idea. One of the things we looked at when we were looking at the retail sector in our report that just came out recently, we had this sort of conundrum coming for retail and fast food, which is that everything, if we think automation is coming in a big way, the workers we currently employ, we actually have an entire resource base which companies have that they could educate after a certain level of, however they thought the conditions were, and allow them through, college grants or through some sort of reimbursed tuition to actually generate some of these skills and be the workforce they need of the future. The big issue for all these companies as they go forward and they try and put these automation technologies in, they're going to be competing for workforce out of Silicon Valley, and fundamentally they cannot afford that. It's not going to be possible. So for them, one of the big impetuses, and we see it at Best Buy, Amazon does it, Walmart now does it, and 2 of the auto part retailers do it. They do reward you after a certain couple of years of service to say, look, we'll subsidize college. And I think if you can funnel people towards engineering, mathematics, science, the questions of those, you're actually building your future workforce. Like, you're actually able to take your company forward, because what might happen and what we're seeing sometimes is the advent of technology pushes their wages down as they are forced to do more and more sort of greeter jobs while the automation technology does all the actual tasks. And those greeter jobs don't allow you to move up the promotion pyramid. So you actually lose corporate knowledge between the stores and perhaps whatever corporate you are. So that's a lot in a little bit of information, but I don't know. We think, especially public listed fast food and retailers, those who want to be tech-enabled in the future and have a workforce that doesn't cost them an absolute fortune, should consider their workforce as a potential education pool.
The long-term benefit is actually...
Yeah, and we as shareholders then need to give them the view that they can do that, right? Because as shareholders sometimes we say, well, no.
So are there companies that have done it successfully that can be held up as role models to other companies?
Yeah, there is. I mean, obviously, unfortunately, Walmart has it's always complex with Walmart, but they do that. They provide now with the American Public University, they actually provide an online service. You can go and do any course, and they subsidize it once you work with them for 2 or 3 years. Best Buy does a similar thing. Unfortunately, a lot of these great initiatives are also done by Amazon. So, it's mixed.
And are these companies, is there evidence that this approach is actually paying back, whatever that means?
It's very early so far, but we would like to think so because we don't see any other way. I mean, fundamentally, we do not want the average fast food company to be having to recruit along with Facebook and Amazon for the same workers. We think it's difficult to do. We think it's put us in a bad position in that respect.
Julia, in looking through this question and preparing for today, I was reading your essay, Phones But No Papers. And you had said there was a new kind of risk faced by low-wage workers in the U.S. I'd be curious what risks you see that low-wage food workers are seeing in the workforce, and what the impact of this might be going forward.
Thanks for reading my essay first. It's great. You should all go read it. Click on it because that looks good for me. So I think.
Click on it because it looks good for you. This
Yeah.
is us working for an algorithm at
Yeah,
this point. If we go
exactly.
that route.
Yeah,
Careful.
yeah, right. Yeah, I'm not sure Data and Society would actually track that kind of thing. They might reject that out of hand. But I think, one of the things I was trying to get at with that essay is that is getting back to something that I mentioned a little bit earlier, which is one of the things that I think is really beautiful about the social sciences and about sociology in particular is the ability to see the ways that all of these different levels of societies, all of these different systems that we're talking about here, everything from the sort of global dynamics of an increasingly global economy, the interests of particular businesses or industries, all the way down to the dignity and job satisfaction of particular workers, right? That all of those things are sort of interlinked. And increasingly with data intensive technologies or big data technologies, that it's not enough to limit our analysis as a researcher to one of those layers, but we have to really start at a systems level, start of thinking about all of the interconnections between these things. So with that piece, I was pointing out that in a lot of ways, undocumented workers, which the food industry has plenty of, are a really interesting, from the perspective of a researcher and from the perspective of perhaps civil society, terrifying or scary edge case or a case study to really understand the ways that these different systems, these different data-intensive systems can really interconnect and have really scary consequences for individuals. So in that piece, what I talked about was the ways that these technologies like DoorDash, like Uber Eats, the gig, especially the gig technologies, because they have to track independent contractors throughout a very complex ecosystem, like New York City, for example, that the kinds of information that they gather on their workforce is proprietary. We don't know much about it. At Data and Society, what we do is we do attempts to reverse engineer these apps, right? So when you sign up for them, you can see the permissions that you have to give. I'm sure we've all done this, where you kind of quickly scroll through, you say, oh, I need something to eat, I'm hungry, I need to download Seamless, I don't really care what they're collecting, great, right? So we pay very close attention to those agreements. We also look at the different kinds of permissions that these apps ask for. So what you'll see is if you download Uber Eats, if you want to sign up as an Uber Eats worker, the Uber app asks for permission to track you all the time, not just when the app is open. And actually, as an Uber user, it also does that to you too, if any of you are doing that, are using that app. Lyft provides a middle option where you can just track your location when the app is open. Uber gives you a zero, yes or no answer to that preference.
I was going to say, every day is wonderful with Uber, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
horrendous.
New things, yeah.
I love all the Twitter jokes that have been coming up about, driverless cars and Uber now having, management lists.
Driverless management,
Driverless management,
yeah.
now that their CEOs even stepped down. It's interesting, you used Uber and Uber Eats as an example about privacy there, and I find it really interesting looking at one of the largest companies, Apple, reacting to Uber. The next version of iOS is going to have an option that does not allow an app that forces an app to have that middle ground. So it's this interesting duality where we do see large companies in the tech space siding in some ways with the consumer, and we see large companies that are siding with maybe dark pattern is the right kind of term here, where they're doing something that's not quite in the consumer's interest if the consumer fully understood it. This is your agreeing to the terms and conditions about really knowing what's going on there.
The end, just the very end of the story about the risk, how do all these theoretical things boil down to the actual individual worker? Is that, so recently in New York City, we saw the case where Airbnb came under scrutiny from the New York City government, and they said, hey, you guys should be paying us more taxes, and you should be regulating how many listings your host has. Airbnb held out, and at one point, they actually offered to share some of the data about their hosts with the New York City, parts of the New York City government, in order to help New York enforce those people to pay taxes, right? So I started thinking in the labor context, because that's what I study, what might happen if, under pressure from a particularly hostile president or a different part of the government for even more mundane reasons, if a company like Uber came under pressure to share information about their workers, about their banking information, about their location 24 hours a day as they're tracked on these apps. We don't know what the commitments of these companies are to the privacy of their workers' data, and that's increasingly an unpredictable risk for people who are working in these systems.
Brave new world, right? So then, how to say this? There's a whole lot of issues to unpack there, down to, future uses of data that maybe was collected under one understanding that gets kind of shifted and changed. How do we, as a society, deal with this? The big data stuff. As a technologist, I started seeing it really started getting it in about 2005, which is when Gmail was in beta. Then AWS started a year later. A lot of the current AI stuff that's going around, I kind of looked at in 2011. You can kind of begin to see it with Siri and Google Brain was started in 2011. It always takes a couple of years for these things to kind of be deployed and then becoming something that starts to kind of tease at the problem of technology being ahead of the law and the ethics of everything. It always takes a few years to get there. So this is definitely a case where it seems like the technology is faster than the law. And it's nice to see Apple, in this particular case, kind of be faster than the law, because they can at least be fast on the ethics side. But what do we need to do? How do we, as a society, tackle ensuring that companies are using technologies in ways that are fair and ethical to workers and consumers? And that is a huge question. And luckily, I'm a moderator and don't have to answer it. But how do we tease that apart? Is it doing accountability reports like Data in Society, or I know EFF does this some? On the government side, is it policy? Is it investment? Making sure that investments? There's very, very broad question.
Crack at this really quickly from a policy standpoint, or even just from my own standpoint. I would look at it as identifying what my trends are as a consumer, and wow, I went to Starbucks 5 times that week, right? Something like that, or being able to identify where we have ecosystem gaps, right? Data like that helps us inform specifically the work that I do. Where we have gaps and where we could be building programs. Definitely not looking at it from a dark sense. That's very scary from my end. I would use that in what I assume to be a very positive point, but I can see that not always being the case, which is scary, but also could be extremely beneficial to see where we have a lot of gaps, specifically within the city or within specific neighborhoods.
I just wanted to say, we had somebody talked about Uber. We had a campaign against Uber, and one of the things that we were thinking about is the data that the workers produce is actually really valuable, and they should also have some sort of equity based on that.
This is true with your use of Facebook too. I think it's about $13 a year of value.
Yeah, you totally, just. And I don't have an answer exactly, but I think that's something that we should think about as a society.
Tell me a little bit more about the campaign against Uber that you're talking about.
So we did a paper on the way that, so we're a membership-based organization, and a lot of our members are Uber drivers. And so, the whole deal, I'm sure everybody's well aware now, but how they cheat drivers, essentially, forcing them to be on, you don't know about this?
I'm going to play dumb here.
So gradually, as you're an Uber driver, you get forced to work. And so if you're not on when they want you to be on, you won't get work. You
give you fewer rides.
Yeah.
So they actually penalize you for your overall behavior, not your local behavior.
Yeah.
Okay.
So which goes against the whole argument that they're not employees. They want it.
That doesn't seem like a very friendly gig economy.
Not friendly. So, but then it becomes how do you fight against this and stuff? So, anyway, we wanted to, in our paper, just kind of focus on that, and the question becomes like, where do workers fit in all of this? And so they're either employees, or you give them some sort of equity based on what they're doing, some stock options or something.
Just not that it's a third option to the options that you've laid out, but I think something that hasn't been brought up is that maybe the best way to address these technologies and these data issues is not actually as consumers, but as citizens. That even though these are consumer technologies, that ultimately, the ways that we need to think about these companies are as states almost, right? And that it's scary to me personally, but also to me as a citizen of the U.S., that we had to rely on the beneficence of Apple to regulate that aspect of Uber's data, right? So like, what if the leadership at Apple had other things to care about and they decided not to take up Uber because Uber did it really quietly, maybe, right? Like, we're lucky in a way that Uber is a very splashy and controversial company because they're very highly scrutinized, right? We look at them as scholars. We pay particular attention to Uber because what they do is real, a newsmaker, right? We can write an article for Slate and it gets picked up. But the companies that make less news, because that's a part of their PR strategy, are the ones that are perhaps more worrying. And that I don't want to have to rely on the well-meaning Apple executives to regulate for me.
So it's almost a cultural thing that we allow as a society, and I like the citizens versus consumers thing. I think we have another T-shirt in the making. That there's something there kind of around. I mean, the whole state comment. It's almost like someday I'm going to show up and say, "Hi, I'm Jeff. I'm from the country of Amazon." It's almost becoming how to say. There's a thought here that the companies are becoming more in control of the dynamics of what we're doing than kind of policy government can set.
Then it's up to investors, right? At some point, it becomes quite important that investors have a view and have some structure. I'm not saying that all sectors of the economy require and should have input, but it feels like one of those moments in time where investors sort of have to stand up and start to say, okay, what society are we forming here, and what are we going to reap in the long term? And so we represent a lot of long-term capital people, so endowments, foundations, family offices who want to create sort of what they see, and the real question to us is, we're building a longer-term capital sort of organization. It's been the last couple of years in a city that values transactional capital a lot faster. So they like trading, they like moving, they like making big decisions, big financing. So it's been very interesting for us culturally to watch investors have such issues with saying to companies, listen, what you're doing is actually inappropriate. And not to say, well, what you're doing is not maximizing margin, right? But what you're doing is inappropriate. That's a whole different language. I mean, we spent a lot of time sort of helping analysts and ourselves, and that's why we're here. We wrote something about fast food workers automation in 2015, and now we've written something about retail automation in 2017, because we keep having to say, like, in the medium term, every environmental and social issue becomes a financial issue. They're just pre-financial issues. They just exist currently in your head that they're not impacting you as a company, but they're coming. And those who position better, we believe, will be better positioned for returns. So this is something, part of why I went from environmental and social policy into investment. Part of it was because I think this is a lever at the moment, one of the major levers. I'm saying in the future it shouldn't be in some sense. Finance should go back to being a facilitatory mechanism. But right now we seem to, because of the wage system and because of what we as an industry have done, we have a lot of control, and we don't exercise it as much as we should.
It almost sounds like you're saying, from an overall systems dynamic point of view, there's so much, something's out of whack so much that the pressure is now coming from the investment community to push it back to where it should be. That's not a normal state of affairs.
No.
But is that an accurate kind of
I think
characterization?
We are a stakeholder, but at the moment I feel like we probably have to take on, we should, and we have, and we are responsible to take on more than we have in the past.
And do you think this is shared, this philosophy is shared in the broader financial community?
No, I don't think they broadly share it. I think society is asking very good questions about the role of finance and in exasperating things like Uber or work labor abuse.
Uber's kind of the poster child for so many examples tonight because the CEO was just ousted by the board.
Yeah.
Which is almost like the investors pushing back, saying, no, you can't do this. This is inappropriate.
Yeah, I mean, we wrote a year ago that he should kind of go. Because we had said this was but then it's not, it's him, but it's also a culture, right? So the investors are still saying, well, we're happy as Uber as it is, even though it might not have this guy in charge. It's still culturally the same, right? So my question to Uber is, like, how are you going to change for real? Like just a departure of time. Anyway, side topic. But my real question is for us as investors, and what we need to understand is that everyone in this room, if you have 401ks or you have set up some structure investing, you have a say, and so also empowering society to have more say in their investments, I think is at this point quite important. So I ran that phase.
I have to say that when we started the Uber campaign, Uber was like so popular, like everybody. I remember at a New Year's Eve party last year, I mentioned it to a friend, and they were like, I love Uber, don't mess with them. They just totally love them. It's amazing how much things have changed.
The cognitive dissonance can be surprising sometimes.
Yeah, and so before it became like an issue for investors, it was just like a lot of convincing and fighting, and then, it caught on. Luckily, stuff happened, and now it is where it is. But it takes a lot of work to get there.
I want to be mindful of the time. I know we've been going for about kind of 50 minutes into this portion of the evening. So I'm going to turn the conversation for the last few minutes kind of towards the individual side of things, and ask for those individuals inside our food systems, food workers who are wanting to start their own endeavors, or for larger food organizations, what is it that we can do to help prepare these individuals, either on the small side or even on the larger side? And Stacy, maybe this is a good question to start with you, since you're responsible for creating programs here in New York City that promote these sorts of good jobs. What sorts of tools and resources are out there for people who do want to start their own business in these areas?
Sure. So the New York City Economic Development Corporation is very large. So within there, I work within programs, but we do have an asset management group. We do have a strategic investment group, all of which have some footprint within food, ideally.
We were talking just before tonight. When you say asset, that
Asset,
means
so real
actual
estate.
real estate building. Yeah. You're talking about some incubator stuff as well.
Yes. So within our programs, we do have some incubators, Jamaica Feast, Brooklyn Food, and really, incubators are part of the program to get some of those businesses off the ground, create a network, create a space, because we know real estate is also very difficult for people in food, specifically people who are trying to get into the food business. So one of the programs that I lead is actually called FutureWorks NYC, and it's around advanced manufacturing specifically. And that program is really to make anyone within manufacturing, so as a broad network, manufacturing, food processing, manufacturing, kind of the food industrial sector also falls in there, is really making people aware of technologies that exist that they can implement within their business, but the implementation to make them stay competitive, stay within New York City, and to ultimately grow. And that growth is to then hopefully create jobs, strong neighborhoods, keep people here, keep people working, specifically within food, and obviously the broader manufacturing ones. If anyone is interested in that program, please let me know. I run it. I'm happy to talk about it. And same with the incubators. I have colleagues who are willing to talk about any of this. This is all on our website as well. And again, we have real estate, and a lot of that real estate that we run within the EDC is focused strategically around food. So some food manufacturing businesses, processing, are located in our assets, specifically at the Brooklyn Army Terminal. And it's really key from our end to make sure that this sector stays extremely vital and competitive within New York, because we understand the touch points of food, how important food is from a lens of New York City, and how vast it is from a worker standpoint. It is a high employable field. It's something that we find to be emerging because we have startups that are within ag tech, technology. We have the incubators. We have a lot of these things that are happening in New York. So all of those things are things that everyone here could take advantage of, whether you're thinking about getting into food just today because you want to start a bakery, or if you have a business that's looking to expand, or you need some tax incentives, right? All of those things are things that the EDC can do, and programming specifically is me. That's my plug. Let me know.
So I'll ask everybody, advice that you guys might have for anybody who is wanting to go into any of the food areas, about particular areas that you think are up and coming, areas to avoid, maybe because they're going to be automated away, kind of any parting thoughts on the kind of that area. Again, another crystal ball question. I'm always joking that my crystal ball from Amazon is back ordered. One of these days it'll show up. But is there any particular areas that you think are,
Don't do it.
Don't do it. That's why I usually tell people about writing a book. Don't do it unless you have to.
It's not, especially now when you come to the food service industry. I'm not talking about manufacturing, I'm talking more on the retail food service side.
The Atlantic piece from today was actually saying that this is the best time to be a diner because there are so many restaurants out there, but it's exactly the same problem. There are so many restaurants out there now that the actual return on the restaurants is...
Yeah, well, so many restaurants out there, but so many restaurants also closing. And rising labor cost is the main issue. It's pretty much from the cost of opening and the real estate. It becomes so high, especially in the last few years. If you walk on Bleecker Street, half of Bleecker Street is shut down. Investors are coming in and buying a lot of this real estate, and they prefer to keep it empty versus filling it up.
So avoid opening a restaurant. That's one piece of advice.
Yes, just don't open it.
How about
Open
on
a
the food side? Actually, I was actually in an incubator space in Cincinnati last fall, and it was just amazing. I had no idea, as somebody who likes food a lot, that there are spaces where I can go and rent a small kitchen space for a day a week, or for half a day, or when I become more successful, a small booth, kind of full time, but having all the facilities around, Hobart mixers all the way up. I know it's not your specific division.
We have seen a lot of pop-ups, actually. A lot of restaurants are turning into the pop-up where they go in and they rent an incubator, or they already have a kitchen space to manufacture or prepare food, versus paying the high rent costs. You perhaps just do the pop-up, which is, it changed from one geographical location to another within the city.
It's almost like the gig economy is coming to the restaurant business itself.
Yeah, and to that point, I think the shared economy is actually something that incubators within food very much so benefit from. We see that a lot from a lot of other manufacturing and industrial sectors. Capital equipment for these kind of automated processes, or even just quality control, they're expensive. They take a lot of room. There's things that if you're starting a business, you don't just have $200,000 to throw into a piece of equipment and then hire someone to run that piece of equipment, right? You're only as good as people who are running these things. So that's why incubators or the shared kitchen spaces are really important, because it gives you the opportunity to grow that business without putting so much capital investment into something, and to be creative, right? An incubator is really that opportunity to be creative, to work out the kinks in your business models, and then you can grow, and then you can identify how you grow. Do you grow into a small space? Do you warehouse? Do you co-pack? So an incubator model is, within food extremely important, but we do a lot of incubators for lots of other things, and it's very successful, and it's something from a food standpoint that I find extremely interesting, and I would love to just go tour and eat all the food all day, because it is very, very interesting to watch how these things are happening, and the people working there are like scientists.
Yeah.
You never know what you're going to get, and they smell amazing. So.
So I think with that, we'll open it up to questions from folks. We've been talking for quite a while. Hopefully we hit enough of the points that were tossed out as kind of topics of interest at the beginning. And we need a microphone to pass around for our audience member, 2 of them. Okay. So I think maybe I'm going to hand my microphone off to you guys, because I assume most of the questions here will be for our panelists.
Again, thank you everyone for participating in this panel. One of the questions, and this is sort of a selfish interest question, and I think Julia, you touched on this a little bit. What are the sorts of things that you think an institution like CUNY should be teaching students in order to prepare them for a lot of the changes that are likely going to be coming down the pike with respect to changes in technology? And I guess really kind of simple ways to say, and this isn't just food workers, but in general, in the context of food, how do we future-proof, our prospects for labor in the next 10, 15, 20 years? Is that even possible?
I think as an aspiring college teacher, this question vexes me a lot, right? Especially when you talk to college students, they're very anxious about how to future-proof their degrees, even, right? Like even the folks who have managed to amazingly make it to college, that the decision about what to major in or I met some people last night who were triple majoring, these students, incredible. But because they're very anxious about, they're hedging their bets, right? That's their way of doing it. This is not sustainable for students, as well as the debt load is not sustainable for students for multiple degrees, which is something that we've seen the results of right now. It's crippling. I think for me, and this is my bias as a sociologist, it's this systems level thinking that I talked about earlier, right? Is this way of understanding the world as not an economy and a society and a government, but this way of understanding the ways that all of these systems are interconnected and the ways that these technologies are increasingly tightly interweaving these systems together.
I have a mic back here, so I think that entitles me to a question. Yes?
Yeah, just one moment. Sorry about it. Apologies. I'll just add. At times like these, we generally decide if a sector we might go upstream. One of the things we've been thinking about from an investment perspective is the production of food, the growth of actual agriculture and sustainable protein and all those elements. I actually think we're at a stage now where the balance is shifting away from perhaps the retailers being in power of what food is now, and it's going back towards upstream, back into where we produce it. So I think one of the reasons we kind of think in our business, there are three states of an industry: just being automated, or just having, in some sense, the wave of automation is either just passing on you, or coming for you. So for me, given what's happening in the retail sector, if I had an industry in food, I'd be looking to see how can I produce it. So whether that be urban food systems, sustainable protein, we're very interested in aquaculture, especially full cycle aquaculture that involves lots of different elements, because I actually think food that, on a selfish level, investing in food that I can sell for a premium because it's high quality and people feel it's safe and nutritious, it's valuable to me. So one of the things I've been thinking about lately is go upstream.
So when I think about what's driving technological change in the food sector, I tend to think in terms of, the drive toward profitability. But are there examples that you could share of situations where an effort to reduce occupational health and safety hazards has driven technology? You think about, broadly about the benefits that humans hope for from technology. One of them is the elimination of unhealthy, unsafe, degrading, miserable work. Buscamos lavaplatos.
I mean, we have done a bit of work in this area. I don't know if I can get directly to your question. One of the things we've been trying to think about lately is how to think about a proactive fast food. And actually, one of the ways you can find a really interesting a fast food company that looks after labor is ask whether they have sick days. It's actually a really nice question, because what it speaks to is how they treat labor, but also speaks to the fact that 50% of illnesses you get from restaurants actually come from the workers, from norovirus, right, and from influenza. So What I really think is that technology, hopefully, for instance, we already know they're doing temperature monitoring inside the cooking areas with infrared cameras, so they're constantly checking to ensure that meat is fully cooked, and so you can minimize who gets sick from it. But I don't know if we're seeing technology yet aside, and hopefully this scheduling stuff helps our workers be less, treated better. But I actually think it's really interesting when we think about companies being proactive about workers, think about how they treat sick days. Chipotle just put sick days in. Very few others do. And so that's very interesting from do you actually care about your customer and your labor if you're not allowing people to take days off when they're unwell? Very dangerous.
So I think one thing from like food manufacturing or food processing is obviously quality and consistency are very important for food. I think that's where sometimes when you're talking about upgrading technology or automating some processes, those actually make a lot of sense because you're going to get consistency, you're going to get quality in your food, and also like quality engineers are a very in-demand occupation at the moment. That is really hard to actually find good skilled quality engineers. And food quality is really, really important. So I would say, a lot of those things when it comes to technology are actually extremely beneficial and then lead to some more downstream jobs that, other people can use their value other places if some of those things are automated and allow for less hazards and, listeria breakouts and all those things, that you see in the news all the time. So I think that would be important.
Other questions from the audience?
Can I say something?
Yes.
So, I was just sitting here thinking, I'm not quite sure if I'm answering your question from before. So, from the point of view of workers, your question was like, how can they use technology to, become like their own boss or something? Like, I think it used to be, just like a cash economy. This person would be like selling their churros on the street, and maybe after a while they would get enough money and put up a little stand and maybe a restaurant at some point. I think that's gonna maybe start to disappear as people don't have those options. And I don't see anything, forgive me if I'm wrong, but from the city or anything that's really meant to help those people maybe get into some sort of ownership of something. So I think that's a real concern.
I mean, incubator networks are really key for those things. I can't say it serves the entire, economy of that, but I mean, I think we as an organization recognize that those are really key things because that's value for people, in our economy and people who are clearly that's a form of commerce that we want to make sure that if that's important to them, they can do that. I think those are things that need to grow, and food is important. So I could see our group doing more of that in the future for sure.
I mean, I've seen the incubator website. I know a little bit about it. I think those are for people that are moving to the city, and it's very different. Like it's very much as the neighborhoods are changing and getting gentrified. These are the people that are coming, and the city is trying to attract them to come here because they're competing with San Francisco or something. And so it's part of that whole process where poor people are just getting pushed out.
I don't have a microphone at this point, so I think they're out in the room. I'll just borrow this one. It's right here. Oh, we have another question. Great.
Yeah.
Please.
So I have a question. So I read an article in the New York Times Magazine February issue, which was all about work. Just a little bit about the Ford factory and a little bit about the auto industry and the state of the auto industry now, and how workers are working alongside machines very much so, and a lot of workers who still have their jobs are like, thank goodness for this machine. I no longer need to have back pain, whatever. I don't need to hedge heavy bumpers with my hip all day. But I'm thinking about what happened to the auto industry, and I'm thinking about food production and agriculture. Thank you for mentioning that. And I know that agriculture work and food production and farm work is hard to mechanize, which Craig mentioned in his piece here, and also one of the articles that was linked on the event about the apple harvester.
Isn't that cool?
It was cool, but also terrifying as someone who wants farm workers to keep their jobs and have them be much more just jobs. So I'm just thinking about seeing the fall of the auto industry and the happy symbiosis that humans left in the industry and machines in the industry have. Who is thinking about what it will look like when machines get smart enough to do all of the farm work that we have? And who is thinking about what policies need to be in place to protect farm workers and or building enough of an alternative industry of different kind of agriculture for them to work in? So basically, how could we learn from one industry losing a lot of job opportunity and plan for that inevitability among ag workers?
That is a fantastic question, and my mind goes in 5 different ways when I hear you say that. I have this personal game I like to do in my head called 100 years ago today and 100 years from now. I was walking to a gym that I go to thinking, I live down in Chelsea, thinking about the office buildings that are there 100 years ago and what people were doing 100 years ago in these office buildings were lifting heavy weights and moving them around, and they were being paid to do it. And here I was walking to one of these office buildings to pay money to pick up heavy weights and move them around. And I thought it was so crazy in my mind that I went back 100 years and said to somebody, 100 years from now, instead of being paid to do this, I'm going to come here and pay to do this. They would look at me like I'm a crazy, Martian from wherever. So it's to say, in some sense, that on the time scales involved, these things can be so unfathomable to even unpack by what we think of in our day-to-day lives, what we're used to. So the apple picker, to me, I look at it's that same thing as picking up a heavy weight. Are there other jobs that don't yet exist today that might exist 100 years from now that those people can be trained to work into? So I think 100 years ago, roughly, I want to say 8% of the U.S. population was involved in agriculture, and now it's less than 1%. In the classic example I've seen is hairdressers. 100 years ago, there weren't that many hairdressers. Today, there are quite a few. If you went back 100 years ago and said, oh yes, most people are going to pay somebody money to cut their hair, that would sound like a luxury, only the top 1% could afford. So in some sense, we don't, in my frame, have any sense 100 years from now what it's going to be like for the person that was picking apples in 2017 versus 2117. There are various bits around universal basic income. Finland started doing this a few years ago, experiment, and that's another thread of how do you tackle the problem that comes around from what happens to the jobs that are no longer here today. And this topic just blows up into 5 theses of 5 bookshelves at the local Barnes & Noble if it still exists. And I don't even know where to tease that, but that's where your question has my brain run first. It's that 100 years ago today, 100 years from now, and thinking about the different jobs that happen. One of the key insights I had that somebody told me was about the rate of change being the real predictor, that how quickly we have to retrain a workforce is really the concern. So if you look at driverless cars, and the idea that we're going to have, today amongst these estimates, we're looking at 7 million, 10 million people suddenly no longer employed in that field, well, there might be the equivalent, the hope is, that there is the equivalent of that hairdresser analogy, but you can't take 7 to 10 million people and convert their workforce training into something new in 1 year. And I think that's where a lot of, on the technology side, the technologists, where a lot of my peers get worried about, well, what happens if driverless cars come about and that phase change is only a handful of years? If it's decades, then we're probably fine. If it's 12 months, then we have a very large unemployment crisis on our hands likely. So there's that thought in there as well. I'll look at you guys and say, I'm just the moderator, though. What do you think?
And this actually gets back to your question in the back, too, which I feel like we didn't necessarily answer too directly. But I think your two questions are sort of probing at the same idea, right? This, and one of the things that I think about is where are the companies that I'm studying who I think are setting their workers up to be successful, right? Where are and especially in the tech industry proper, not even in the food sector specifically, where are what does successful work look like in this kind of economy? And I think I have two different kind of examples. So the first is that when companies foreground the meaning of work and workers' dignity as individuals, that often sets them up in the same way that this education invests in the future of their own workforce and ultimately invests in their own interests as companies to kind of reduce their own costs. It also invests in their workers as individuals with human dignity, right? And I think that the companies and the industries who are able to nail that are the ones who end up orienting their technology around that goal, around reducing human misery, around increasing workers' dignity, right? That's the sort of ideal. We can see some sort of glimmers of that in the economy with the education and some other things. The other industry that's really interesting, and I hope I'm not going too far afield from food, is looking at elder care and care work specifically. There have been a few sort of murmurings in the chattering classes about care work jobs being really the most future-proof jobs that we have so far, that we can at least predict so far. And I know at Data and Society I'm a part of a project kind of looking at that a little bit more carefully. But there are a few gig work or on-demand companies who are really trying to grapple with how do we gigify, how do we provide flexibility, how do we make care work safer for the people receiving it and the people giving it. And I think there's a lot of exciting kind of stuff happening in that area. It might be an example for food.
So this is really preliminary for us, but I mean, we are thinking about how technology and unemployment are related and what it means. And universal basic income is kind of interesting, but it can be done poorly. So back to what we were saying in terms of equity, I think a lot of what Silicon Valley has done and stuff has been based on taxpayer like technology, like your iPhone has, all of it has been, actually comes out of taxpayer research. So there should be some way of providing, some sort of equity for workers, like some sort of pension or something based on how much money these companies are making, and they should be taxed.
I would say social security, question mark?
Yeah.
Do we have other questions? Well, I think with that then, seeing the beautiful sun setting in the background, I have to say the view here, you guys all facing us, but not have to see and enjoy what we get to see looking out. That is incredible view. Craig, I don't know if you've got closing.
Yeah, just very simple closing remarks. Thank you everyone for coming, and this will be our last forum until the fall. We'll have our next Urban Food Policy Forum in September. We tend to mix them up between evening and morning forums, but typically they're in the morning. So if you're not already on our mailing list, you can sign up over there on the table, and I hope to see some of you at some of our other forums. Thank you.